Yo, what's going on, guys? It's your boy Psycho, and I've got another Preacher review for you all today. This one is going to be my review of Preacher Season 1, Episode 2, titled C. Now, I just want to say right off the bat that I absolutely love this episode, and I really mean that when I say it. Personally, I believe this episode was actually better than the first one in my opinion. Surprisingly, there was a lot of action for it to be a second episode, and some really cool character development. One very cool, interesting thing about this episode was the intro itself. So far, I'm seeing a pattern of very interesting and captivating intros when it comes to the Preacher television show. For example, we got the first one that was in like Africa, that really started it off with a bang, and then we got this one which was pretty shocking. It started out with a little girl that looked like she was sick in bed, and then as the mother comes in, and then another mysterious figure in the shadow of the doorway, and I really loved how they filmed that because it didn't show you who the person was or what they looked like until a little later on, so it left a lot of mystery there in that scene, which I actually really liked. A quick thought that I do have is it kind of makes me wonder, is that girl the same girl Preacher was talking to a little bit later in this episode? And I know it was like 100 years later, but still, is there something going on with that? I may be just thinking about it in the wrong way, but she kind of looked familiar. We then see the man go on his adventure as he travels across. It says it would take him around 2 to 3 days, I think, and then he meets this area full of people and carriages and things, and we sort of get some interaction between the man and the boy and the mysterious man. When I noticed that the man kept talking, but the mysterious guy wasn't talking at all, it started to feel like he was going to kill these people because he was annoyed with them. Considering I didn't know much about him, I wasn't sure what he was going to do about it, but it seemed like one of those moments you see in other movies or TV shows where the person is just annoying the other character and he just kills them all. We then get that really crazy, shocking scene with all of the Indians in the trees, and what I'm not sure about is, I don't know if he killed the people that he talked to that gave him food, or did he kill all of those Indians that the man asked the guy about. I didn't see any familiar faces with those people that ate with him at the campfire, so I'm going to assume it was the Indians, but that was really shocking, especially with all of those bodies hanging out of the tree. That is a way to start off the episode. We then move on to a really cool scene of the Preacher baptizing these characters, and all of them are confessing their sins and saying that they believe in God and all of that. And once again we see Tulip. She's trying to convince Jessie to go back to his old ways, and her logic is that eventually she's just going to keep asking until he finally returns to them. I personally thought this baptism scene was very cool, and something it reminded me of was BioShock Infinite. I know a lot of you all may not know what I'm talking about, but for the few people that play video games out there, it reminded me of a certain scene in BioShock Infinite, but I just thought that was pretty cool. We then move on over to the two mysterious men, and I just really loved watching these characters as well. It really did remind me of the Mexican twins from Breaking Bad, and I just think it's so interesting to see these characters and try and figure out who they are, who they want, and what they want to do with that person. There was a really funny scene with those guys that I liked, and it was where the hotel maid comes to their door and asks if they want 1 towel or 2 towels, and he just says, no. And for some reason, I just thought that was so funny, just because all he said was no, and he just kept saying it over and over. And then finally she sees the gun and realizes, yeah, I better get the hell out of here. A cool way that the producers played with mystery on the audience, though, was the trunk that those two characters were carrying around. Another scene that I forgot to talk about just then was the scene with the movers. I think it was the movers where they go into the house, they make them sign this, and they bulldoze the house over, but they take all of their stuff out. It was like QYM or something, I don't know what the letters were. But at first I thought these guys were prisoners. It was like the way they had them in the van, but they really did a twist when I noticed that they were just movers. I believe there's definitely more to that storyline though. Especially considering the fact that one of the main men bashed the other guy's face in on the steering wheel just because he picked his pin up. There's a small little thing that I would like to note about that, and that was the effects. It was the blood coming out of the guy's nose. I wish they would have actually showed his nose just a little bit to see the effects there. It was kind of obvious that they had a tube of blood coming out of his nose on the other side just spewing, but you could say that was intentional cheesiness with the way they do comedy on this show. Either way, I think the actions of that man doing that was probably because he picked his own pin up because the guy's arm was broken. Even though that's respect, the other guy considers it disrespect because he thinks, I can do this on my own, and by you doing it for me, it makes it look like you think that I'm weak. I believe that's just maybe one of those perspectives that guy might be taking. We then move on over to the parking spot with Jesse Custer as he's taking recommendations for the church, and this is where he meets Tulip once again. She keeps doing these things over and over just to remind him of the idea of getting him back in the game, and she's basically sending the message of, I'm gonna make your life hell unless you do this for me. He noticed the steering wheel hanging up on the lamppost, and I think there's a lot of metaphors with these situations with Tulip. Especially with Tulip saying stuff like Jesus taking the wheel and other things like that, I believe there's a lot of metaphors and things to be interpreted to the steering wheel being taken and then him being chained up but the chain actually not being attached. Maybe it's something like Jesse doesn't really have a lot of control over his life right now, such as not having the steering wheel, but somehow he's going to be guided in the right direction. And then the chain being on, such as a weight on your shoulders, but really that weight is not as much as you think, or it's a problem that could be dealt with easily. I think there's more than one interpretation to these ideas as well. I would love to hear what some of you all think in the comment sections of what this meant to you, and I think it's something really cool that the producers chose to do. They put this out there with their interpretation, but they also give room for the audience members to develop their own interpretations. Anyways, I want to move on over to the scene with Cassidy and Jesse Custer. This was a really cool scene, and honestly, it was my favorite scene of the whole episode and the whole series so far. Cassidy admits to Jesse that he is actually a vampire. Of course, Jesse doesn't believe that at all as he first says it, and I think a lot of audience members might not believe that as well, especially as a non-comic reader. For myself, it was something that I had predicted in the first episode. I had no knowledge of the comics, but there were hints that I saw in the first episode that did seem a little interesting and weird involving Cassidy. So it's kind of awesome to see myself actually predicting that, and it was also confirmed throughout this episode with things like him not being able to go out in the sun, his wounds healing by him sucking up blood, and just stuff like that. I like how they played with the audiences a little bit with that idea though. Jesse drinks whatever that stuff was and passes out. This is where Cassidy goes on a run, and then he comes back to find the two men. Now this was also something that I had not thought about until this episode right here, but when Cassidy said that he was a 119-year-old vampire, or however old he said, he also stated that people were hunting him down all of the time, and at that moment I thought, what if those people that are tracking the church and tracking that place in Africa are actually looking for Cassidy because he's a vampire rather than Jesse? And it was just so cool to see that actually coming true here. It was definitely a surprise to audience members, I think. And to finally get that twist in your head and realize, oh, they're not looking for Jesse, they're actually looking for Cassidy. I just thought that was a really cool twist. I'm going to look back and think a little more in depth when it comes to the song that they sung. I don't know if there's a lot to that, but I'm going to check it out anyways, because there could be. It was just crazy how they had put so much work into doing one thing. Maybe getting the spirit out of whoever they thought was Cassidy, or maybe they wanted to harness whatever that was themselves. Of course, Cassidy busts open the door and we get a very awesome fight scene, probably one of my favorite fight scenes from a TV series, and it really reminded me of the movie called Dead Alive. There was a lot of shots with Cassidy where just blood was all over his face and he was making some crazy faces, and that really reminded me of the movie Dead Alive. I don't know if many of you have seen it. I think that movie is actually hard to find. I believe they no longer sell it, but you could probably find it online. It really just reminded me of that. You get more hints of Cassidy being a vampire by him surviving shots from a bullet and being able to fight just like an absolute boss. He gets slashed over and over by the chainsaw, and he still fights the guy. Once again, this kind of reminded me of Hank and the twins from Breaking Bad. And the brutality of it was also really cool. It was crazy to just see him beating this guy's face in with a Bible. We see that he can't go outside for now, but eventually he buries the trunk, and there was a very interesting scene that I was kind of surprised I noticed, and that was the tree in the background. I believe that tree is the same tree that it showed in the very intro of this episode when the people were hanging from it. I feel like it's making a lot more sense now, such as maybe that's some sort of bad omen that brought some of this evil here. You could say it's some sort of Indian religion spirits or something like that that's causing all of these bad things to happen here. I don't know specifically with Jessie, but with all of the other people and the things they're going through and the types of people that are in this town. Of course, Jessie wakes up, he goes to this woman's house, and he talks to the mother about her daughter who is supposedly in a coma, and of course the mother's given up on hope. It was one of those scenes where he's saying some inspirational quote and you're thinking, wow, this person's really going to be inspired by this, and then it just hits you with that load where the person's like, yeah, that's bullshit. So that kind of surprised me as well. We see Jessie move on over to the situation with Jessie and the person who I am assuming is a bus driver. He goes over to his house after his interaction with Eugene, and once again there's a consistency with Eugene's words reflecting on Preacher, and Jessie actually relating them to his life. He acts on the conversation with Eugene and he goes to the bus driver's house. I think this is actually where old Jessie starts to kick in, and this whole confrontation was very awesome as well. Just the opposite parallel itself of a sort of twisted baptism scene in boiling water. I just think it's awesome how it started out with Jessie and the baptism scene, of course in normal water, and this one he returns with boiling hot water. We see Jessie's powers work once again, and I actually believe this is the first time Jessie realizes he has these powers. Of course he heard about the thing with the other guy ripping his heart out, but he didn't see those results firsthand and it being acted so quickly. We know that he's realized his powers because he goes back over to the little girl, and he uses those powers in confidence to wake the girl up. However, I believe there might be something twisted going on with this, potentially. As we know from Jessie using his powers, there's sometimes a little bit of catch to those words. Sometimes those words are taken literally, such as, open your heart, and he told the girl to open her eyes. Now this could mean that the girl could open her eyes, but she could still be in a coma. She would have her eyes open, but she wouldn't move, she wouldn't do anything. Now if this does happen, he could probably say something else and then fix it. But I can see how this could also go wrong. Maybe cut out her eyes, I don't know about that one. But it could happen, maybe. Just to go over a few little scenes that I missed very quickly, the readjustment of the letters on the church sign was a nice touch once again, and I would love to see that happen almost every episode because it's just a really cool touch. There was also a really funny comedy moment where he goes in the bus driver's house, punches the guy in the face, and then starts running his bathtub and taking off his jacket. The guy says, "What do you think you're doing? You can't just run in and start up somebody's bathtub." And I just thought that was a really cool comedy moment because he didn't say anything about punching him in the face, just run in the bathtub. After that, the final thing that I want to mention is the situation with Tulip and Jessie. This is where she tells Jessie that she's not going to tell him what's going on with this plan that she wants him in on, but she'll let him find it out himself. And this kind of leads me to believe it has something to do with his father that was killed. Maybe she finally found the man that killed him. To me, it seems like something she knows Jessie would be interested in. I don't know, but there's been a lot of emphasis on that lately, especially within this last episode. However, I don't think we've got anything with that in this episode, and that could potentially be what Tulip's relating it to. Anyways, this was just an awesome episode. I wanted to brush over some scenes and talk about them and my interpretation of some certain scenes, and I just really enjoyed this. Preacher is becoming a show that I really love being involved in. It's honestly hooking me with some mysteries such as to certain characters. Who are these moving people? How are those two agents still alive after being dismembered by Cassidy? It's just all of those questions that I think is a good way to get someone hooked on a show and involved in wanting to watch more of it. That's something I believe Lost and The Walking Dead do very well, because Lost the TV show always ended with some mystery that made you want to see the next episode. You wanted to figure this out. And I think that's the cool thing about Preacher. You want to know what's going to happen next. You're mystified, but you still want to know what happens. And the only way to do that is to tune in next week. I'm going to say this right now, I'm a fan of Seth Rogen in his comedy area. However, there were some doubts within myself of him doing something more serious, even though it's a little comedy, doing something serious like this drama right here. However, I can fully say that he is executing this show very properly. He's definitely exceeded my expectations when it comes to this, so I just want to give huge props to Seth Rogen. Also, make sure to let me know what you thought about this episode in the comments section below. I always love listening to what you all have to say. You may not know it, but I try and read every single comment that you all write, so I would love to hear what you all think about this. Please make sure to also leave a like on this video to show some support for future videos. I love covering this show, so that would help out an absolute ton. Thanks again, guys. Peace out.